For us to go live. You on YouTube, Dan?
I think I should.
Are we on YouTube too?
Yep.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, good evening. This is the Town of Camden Planning Board meeting, Wednesday, March 15, 2023. It's continuation of a public hearing on piers, but we're going to start at the beginning here and first ask if there are any public comments on non-agenda items.
Is this where I would make a agenda?
Was that on the agenda?
Alteration to the agenda, or do we do that?
No, I do that after.
We'll do that after, yeah. So seeing none, I do have something of my own, and it's just generally for the board. I had some discussions with, based on the way the last hearing went, and with a discussion with Jeremy and with Bill Kelly, the town attorney, to sort of clarify what the role of the board is and provide some clarity for us as we work through our process. And I think it's important to remember that we are essentially a municipal reviewing authority. We're appointed by the select board. We're not elected officials. So we should focus on the jurisdictional stuff that's before us, what we're charged to do. That's either, looking at zoning ordinance amendment or application of site plan criteria, et cetera. Bill was very clear that we're not really a policy group. He actually said policy that we shall not do. Essentially as a board, we're charged with holding properly noticed hearings and receiving testimony and then moving forward with that. We are not really, as far as the policy stuff goes, that is for the elected officials. So the legislature and the select board are the ones who really get into the policy of stuff, which obviously both elected bodies. So when it comes to these sort of ordinance reviews that we did last year or last week or last time, and also what's coming up before us today, we really are an ordinance review board. That's what we're really charged with, is looking at the ordinance and does it do what it's supposed to do? Do we have suggestions to improve it, make sure that we meet the standards and that sort of thing? And then the secondary part of all of that is just the idea of investigations outside of the meetings by individual board members. And so I went and looked up the Maine Municipal Association's Planning Board Manual, and I just want to read a little bit from it. And I do want to make sure first, it gets a little confusing because Bill was careful to point out that there are sort of two points to this. And one is, if there's an applicant before us with a property right, so they've got a permit and they're trying to get a permit and it's a property right, there's a strict prohibition against doing any outside research outside of the board's purview. That's a strict no-no. And the reason that is because that person with that property right could say, well, you went outside the evidence that was presented at the hearing, and therefore they could, in the end, file suit or something like that. When it's something more like a ordinance review from a proposal, from a petition from a citizen or something like that, it's a little more gray. But I do want to read what they say here in the manual. So investigations conducted by board members. Sometimes board members want to collect information to help the board make its decision rather than relying solely on the information presented by the applicant or other parties. Such a practice could be viewed as evidence of bias on the part of that board member, so probably should be avoided except where publicly authorized by a vote of the board. So in this situation, I want to just sort of address it in a fact where we had it in the short-term rentals. We had a workshop, and then as a board, we said, we should really look at what other towns are doing. And then we all sort of agreed on that, and then we designated people to do that sort of thing. And we collected a bunch of information, and then we brought it back and we discussed it and we looked at their ordinances. So it was all part of the process. And here I just want to be clear that what did happen, and this did happen, if a board member does engage in such conduct, he or she should be sure that it's done in an objective way and that any information collected is entered into the board's record, which did happen. And then the board should provide an opportunity for the applicant and members of the public to respond. So that's that part. And then it's just as far as the basis for another section in the manual, basis for the board's decision and the general rule, once the board has determined the scope of its authority and the applicant's burden of proof, it must determine whether there is sufficient evidence in the record to support a decision to approve the application by comparing the information of the record to the requirements of the ordinance and the statute. The board should not base its decision on the amount of public opposition or support displayed for the project, nor should its decision be based on the member's general opinion that a project would be good or bad for the community. Its decision must be based solely on whether the applicant has met his burden of proof and complied with provisions of the statute or ordinance. Now, again, when you're talking about a site plan review, that's pretty crystal clear. When you're talking about an ordinance proposal, it's less so. So I think we've all gone a little bit far afield at times with what we're, focused on and what we bring to the table. But I think it's good to remember that caution in general and as we move forward on all of these things, because I know I've gotten on my soapbox and said things that maybe weren't really within the purview of what we should be looking at, and it takes us off the thing. I've been told that I'm supposed to gavel those things down when they happen. I don't have a gavel. I've never used one. Jeremy assures me there's one around here. I don't want it. But I will be a little bit more aware of when we're getting far afield, and I would also welcome any suggestion that I have gone far afield as well. And with that clarification, I'm ready to move on to the rest of the hearing. Go ahead.
I just have one question, and I know we talked about this earlier. The vote that we did on sending the retail cannabis stores to the select board, and how it was 2-2. And my vote was based upon a health policy.
Mhm.
So and because we're looking at only zoning ordinances,
Mhm.
and that, like we had talked about, isn't one of the zoning ordinances, where does that fall out then? And I know.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, the question is, we were 2-2 in our vote
Yeah.
to pass it on to the select board.
Yeah.
The retail cannabis.
Yeah.
So, and Lucia had other reasons
Right.
that she was talking about, but mine was more of a health policy
Right.
issue. And since that's not what we're supposed to be looking at, how does that fall out then?
Oh, you mean, is there any action that we should take on it? Or, I mean, I kind of feel like it's water under the bridge.
Are you
personally.
referring to the public health aspect of it specifically? Or are you
Yeah,
talking about what
because I
happens?
was-
Why is there 2 vote and why is it going to the select
No,
board?
because I was, my take on the higher potency THC products was that they were
Yeah.
mental health implications.
Right.
So, but that's not under our purview after we
Right.
discuss things
Right.
more.
Yeah. And I think that's so if I understand, like,
So
As-
we
as-
sent this on. but-
as it was voted on by us, if it was 0-4, it was still going to the select board.
Right,
If it was 4-0, it was going to the select board. And if it's 2-2, it's going to the select board.
right.
So we have 2 select board members here and there was another meeting. They are aware of maybe some problems with the way we voted.
Mm.
That's the way I look at it. I'm not sure that we need to take any corrective action. As far as concerns that you have as a citizen about the health impacts of high potency THC, I think that your avenue is as any other voter, which is to go to the select board and also to a public hearing at the select board as a citizen.
Right.
And also, because you're not prevented from that as a planning board member, and also to vote with your vote.
But I
it's
guess
put up.
going forward, though, I should be more cognizant of these things.
Right, I think that we all should pay attention more to what the charge is before us, sticking to the language of the ordinance and how that applies and those sorts of things. I think that's the clearest way I can say it, is that we should all be looking for, what the ordinance before us says. And as I use an example with you, we had a letter from the Corner Spring School said, we want to make sure we're included in the definition, but they didn't say we want it to be 1,000 feet instead of 500. But if that was something that people on the board wanted to discuss, that we thought maybe we should look at the 1,000 over 500, that was certainly within the scope of the ordinance.
Yeah.
But going beyond that and something along the lines of, I'm concerned about the health effects of marijuana. We know that there are uncertain studies all around on that, and that's just not in our policy, but
Right,
that's a
that
policy
wasn't in our
decision that the state of Maine has already
purview,
made, and the voters of Maine have already made, and so therefore that's a perfectly legal application. So that was why it should have been left out from that perspective. And
I would say Bill Kelly has offered, and, we do need to get a training done of some sort. And so he's offered to do that, and we can do it at any time during the day, even via Zoom with him. It would be a public meeting, obviously, because it's the full
Yep.
board.
But based on my conversation with that, I would highly recommend it because there was a lot of clarification, and he had in a 20-minute conversation so much information that I could hardly scribble it all down and organize it. But it was he really does have it back and forth, inside out, and can do a great job. And I think we would benefit from that.
Yep. We'll schedule that.
Great. Any other non-agenda items or public comments? Okay, I think we're all set then. This is when you could jump in. Yes, Allison.
I really appreciate the process conversation you're having. Obviously, you got to see a little bit of that at the select board too. And there's clearly sort of a little bit of confusion all around from us too. But I think one thing that would be important to discuss at some point would be the idea of the planning board only taking on or reviewing what they're charged to do, what that means, and who has the authority to charge you with something, and how that works. Because it seems like some of the confusion comes from just in town in general, all committees and all boards, a little bit of confusion about oftentimes with what the charge of the board or committee is, who it came from, and what leeway there might be there. So I mean, I've certainly
Right, and
seen planning boards over the years go very far into the policy area. My understanding had always been that in their capacity as doing site plan review, the planning board is acting in a different way than ordinance development or comprehensive plan development. And so that's what they tell us on the select board too, that there are certain times when we're acting as a quasi judicial
Right.
board, but then there are other times that it's more policy oriented. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because, for instance, take up the short-term rentals again. That was a planning board initiated review of the ordinance, and we have tabled that for a while, but we brought that up ourselves because we thought it was an important issue for zoning in the town. But it's directly related to the zoning aspect, and that's what I think is what I mean by the focus. We obviously are going to bring policy into zoning.
right.
Right. But we're not going to bring, we don't bring in a good example again is sort of the dangers of high potency THC into whether or not they'll allow a retail cannabis store because they are different.
And I think the other piece is to sort of think of, we have initiated some work as the board, and we've done that in our workshops, versus when it's an actual formal hearing. There are much more strict guidelines on what the hearing is in what we're tasked with. But we can initiate some of that, and then we can say, we've come up with a new ordinance for an amendment that because of what we've talked about with town staff and other things, and then we go through a hearing process and then end.
There are a lot
It
of-
can be both ways.
If you look at the comprehensive plan, which probably we should all do more often, there are a lot of things in there that, the planning board is tasked with
Right.
kind of overseeing implementation, or the
Yeah.
select board or different
Yeah.
committees. So
Certainly in the last year or two, we've been sort of going back to some of those things and saying, does
Yeah.
this still need to happen? And
Yeah. And to add a little more mud to the clarity of all of this, Bill did talk about the comp plan as well. And we often say consistent with the comp plan. Realistically, what that means is that it is not prohibited in the comp plan. Directly
right.
prohibited. Anything that's not directly prohibited is technically by the courts ruled consistent with the comp plan.
right. A lot of the comp plan says though that, the town should look at this.
Yeah.
This should be looked at, this should be looked at. And so it seems like those things, when it's specifically tasking the planning board, you do have the
Authority.
blessing or the authority to say, all right, well, the select board is doing whatever they're doing and they haven't necessarily tasked us with this, but the
Sure.
comprehensive plan says the planning board should be looking at
Right.
this. So,
So we could have brought forward on our own initiative a retail cannabis amendment. We did that with the cultivation, right? We didn't have, that was not a citizen amendment. That was our own initiative. This was a citizen initiated, so that once we get to that point, especially, we're in a little bit more of a narrow review. But I think in general, things that are within our purview are the zoning aspects of the store, not the policy considerations around it, whether marijuana is good or bad, or alcohol is good or bad, or anything else.
Right. The use of the harbor, planning, the zoning around that.
Yeah.
Do you think, like your conversation about short-term rentals, that those discussions were legitimized by what the comp plan says?
Absolutely. Yeah,
So I
and
think
that's
it
where we got
supports
our-
that.
right.
So.
Right.
Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else? Comments, questions? Okay. All right, we will try to move on to the business of the evening. Do you have something for us, Chriso, on the first?
You want to do that now?
Yeah, I think it's a good time.
So based on a few additional information, I'm going to make a motion that we continue the review of the application for preliminary plan review for subdivision by Nordhaven to our March 29th meeting at 5 PM.
Second.
We have a second. Motion a second. Lucia? Oh,
Yeah.
Aye.
aye. It's an aye from me.
Aye.
Aye.
And you got John up there.
Oh. Hi, John.
Can we angle that
Aye
screen a
as
little so
well.
we can,
Sorry. There you go.
thanks,
we
Ken.
go.
Vote aye.
Thank you, John. Good to see you.
I'll see you in person on the 29th.
Fantastic. So that takes care of the Nordhaven thing. There's just some new information came in and they're working on it. So it was agreed with the applicant to move that, continue that hearing. So now we are taking up the public hearing, which we continued at the last meeting as it was running long and we had more on the agenda. So this is the consideration of the ordinance amendments. And I will just read quickly. The Harbor Committee, in response to the charge from the Select Board resulting from the current moratorium regarding residential piers, docks, floats, ramps, and other structures in Camden's outer and coastal harbors, has submitted a report and recommendations dated 2/7/23. The report contains recommendations for amendments to the Harbor and Waterways Ordinance to ensure that that ordinance and our zoning ordinance, which is Chapter 290, are consistent. We require 5 changes in the ordinance, in the zoning ordinance. And so we were discussing that, and I think we started to run a little far afield on some issues about what we felt about piers in general. So I have a feeling, but I also think Chriso may have one. So I was going to let Chriso jump in real quick as far as discussion, because that's where we are now. We're not in a public comment. The public comment period was closed. So we've received all the public comment that we're going to receive. So now we're just in a discussion as to how we want to address piers, whether sticking straight to review of the ordinance and whether to send that on or any other discussion. So go ahead, Chriso.
Yeah, thank you. Sort of, and in keeping with your opening comments, we are looking at what's been proposed as an amendment. And I think that a couple of the key factors in that are really important. And I think we need to move that piece along, particularly the addition of including land attached floats. And then what I'm wondering is if we can do that in a way that we can then ask the Select Board to continue discussions of moratoriums and changing some of the ordinance of where any future piers would be allowed as a separate conversation. That might mean, and to sort of, I think that would, if we send this on to the Select Board and then to the voters in the spring, the temporary moratorium goes through the fall. If we wanted to look at a further reworking, it was also interesting as we talk about what charges, who was charged with what. At the Select Board meeting last week, one of the members of the Harbor Committee spoke to the fact that they had very specific things that they were asked to look at. And there's clearly a lot of energy around the number of peers to be discussed. And I just feel like it doesn't fit in this conversation, but I think we should be really trying to assert our right to discuss that further.
Okay. Anyone else?
As the planning board, you're saying?
Yeah.
No, but I would go along with what Chris just mentioned.
I guess I would suggest that, again, I don't know the temperature of the board from when I last made my ill-fated speech. But I would suggest that we should do as you propose, which is to go through the actual ordinance as drafted by compared with the harbor ordinance, and decide whether or not to send that on. And then I think we are absolutely entitled to, whether we decide or not, put a caveat in there that, like, we still think there's a lot of discussion that needs to go on about whether or not piers should be allowed, period, or in certain areas of the harbor, period, or whatever that we feel. And we could send that both on to the select board with our recommendations. And I think that's an appropriate way to handle it. Is everybody in agreement with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so I think first we should really just go right through the ordinance.
I would just like to throw out from a timing piece. I do think that it's late for us, for the select board to have a hearing on the pier moratorium or the changes to our shoreline or chapter 290 in order to get them to voters in June. So I think from I think it is I think you can do what you're saying, is send this on because this is what the Harbor Committee developed and drafted. And you are okay with this, but there's an understanding, I think, based on all the comments that were taken at the last meeting, that it does need further review, probably by the board, probably by the Harbor Committee, probably by the Conservation Commission or committee. So maybe part of and I'm just trying to think how to move this along. I don't think it's not going to happen in June.
Right. So if what I was thinking is that, we have, under the terms of the moratorium, we are looking at, we've made some changes, but we're doing further work so that when that 180 days expires, the select board could renew that a third time.
They could
which
to
would
get to
give us-
November.
So then we would be looking at trying to do something for the November ballot.
Right. And so
That was the time frame that I was thinking might
Okay.
be feasible.
that makes sense. I mean, we have to make progress, right? And I think the folks from the Conservation Committee and the public comment we heard, I think gives us some grounds to look at it further. And if we can get a small group of the planning board together and maybe a couple Harbor Committee members, a couple Conservation Committee members, and maybe a select board liaison, and really have some of those discussions, because that needs to happen in order to get to, if we want to get to November, which we really need to do, that language needs to be done really in like late August or September. So,
I think there's enough energy around it right now.
I think
that
so.
If we've said, Harbor Committee, Conservation Committee, you guys have a couple people who want to have a meeting next week, they'd say, okay.
right.
Can I just ask a quick question? Is there a property owner out there who has, who, if it goes on for 180 days and then another 180 days till November, is there someone that will not be able to repair or
Lucia, I think your
Put
mic's
into-
not on.
oh, I'm sorry. If this goes on until November, is there anyone out there within the purview of this particular item that will not be able to repair their pier, or that
So,
it will be injured by this?
I guess I would speak to what the ordinance says, and that talks about, and the moratorium even provides for people allowed to do routine repair and maintenance. That's allowed. So, and maybe you're referring to a pier that was damaged during the storm. What I've had this conversation with the town attorney, rebuilding is not repair and maintenance. So in our review, I mean, it is all of this stuff, you can come at it from both sides.
Sure.
And argue it and say, well, the ordinance says this and, it says this too. I mean, you can just get into that back and forth, but we were of the opinion that pier actually needs select board approval and review again. So that one will likely have to sit out there. There is some question about whether it was non-conforming structure and whether or not they can build it. I don't believe that applies in this case. I think once the pier goes, it goes, and you've got to get it reviewed again. And so there's a moratorium in place. And so they would technically, the way I view it, are prevented from rebuilding that until the town moves forward on this.
Repairs are possible. I just
Repairs
didn't
and
want someone to have hardship. because-
repairs and maintenance are possible. Rebuilding is not repair or maintenance.
I would also just, like the moratorium is in place till September.
September 9th or something.
So anyone who, like, looking at the scheduling of dock construction companies, where they are right now, particularly the one primary one who most of these people would be using, they're not going to be doing anything this year, even if everything was 100% go ahead this year. So none of them are going to be, because the moratorium is already in place through this season.
And the important thing to do is to keep working on it and not let it become stale. And, the committees or
Yeah.
the town, the select board need to appoint folks to really dive into it a little deeper, clearly to me, based on the comment that we're getting.
Sure.
Because the harbor committee, as much as they are open meetings, and I think the harbor committee would tell you that over and over, these are open meetings. We want public comment. When this was advertised and there was a public hearing, we got the public comment. So I think we are.
Yep. That's absolutely correct. Okay. So we had looked at this before, and I'm just wondering if we want to jump to specific portions of the proposed amendment or review it piece by piece, or if we're even prepared for an in toto endorsement of what's here, as it applies to just squaring with the harbor ordinance recommendations. Is there room for discussion? Do you have discussion points, Pat?
No, I was okay to approve the whole package, I guess you could say.
And
To
you,
go
Lucia?
forward, yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel, Chriso? John, how about you?
I'm prepared to vote in toto.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much hammered out the pieces that are
Yep.
in the amendment.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so
I would make a motion to approve the amendments.
Second?
is that your whole motion?
Well, no, I was debating if I want to do it. I'm trying to think how I want to say it. I was going to say that I want to make a motion that we approve the amendments as proposed by the Harbor Committee, but report to the Select Board that we feel strongly there is further work to be done amending the harbor ordinance, and ask them to create a working group of stakeholders
To
to pursue
include,
these with the goal of amending for a November vote. Does that work?
I think that works.
Would you accept a friendly amendment?
Yes.
So motion to approve these amendments to square with the Harbor Committee's recommendations, with the caveat that we strongly feel a working group is necessary to discuss further changes to include stakeholders from the Harbor Committee, the Conservation Commission, and the Planning Board. Up to and including completely banning piers within the coastal harbor or the outer harbor.
Coastal and/or.
and/or outer harbor, just to let that know that that's a possibility.
I think it would be helpful to base that on the public comment that that you
Based on the
obtained.
public comment that we received.
Can
Yeah.
you repeat that?
Yeah, can you repeat that?
Well,
I think we're getting there.
well, that's why I just almost wondered if we just wanted two separate motions. That's why I had the long pause.
Yeah,
Um,
I think one is best.
But yeah, we'll put the caveat. So it's with the caveat that we are going to strongly urge a working group consisting of members of the Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Harbor Committee to look at further amendments to harbor ordinance, including the possibility of prohibiting any new piers in the outer and/or coastal harbor.
So I just want to be clear that we're not actually recommending that that be there,
No,
just
just
that
that
they
that's on the
consider
table.
that as
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah.
And it's based on the conversations from the public and within our own board discussions.
And do we have a second on that?
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. I will take a roll call vote. Lucia?
Aye.
Aye.
Pat, aye. John?
Aye.
Chriso?
Aye.
And it's an aye from me, so moved. That was quick. Didn't know it was gonna happen so speedily. I'm impressed. Sorry if you showed up for public comment or anything more exciting.
So our
But-
next meeting is the 29th.
Yep, we have a meeting on the 29th, excuse me. But we'll take up the Nordhaven application.
Mhm.
And is that the only thing on there right now?
That will be the only thing on there.
Okay, probably a good idea because that will be
a
plenty. Okay.
You will be getting some revised plans
I was just gonna
for
ask
that.
you.
Because there's stuff going on.
There's stuff going on, and then they got some comments to some of our comments, and
And we're also waiting for the stormwater.
yeah, the stormwater, there's communications back and forth, and we're looking for some more comment from our third-party review engineer on what they've submitted back to us. So I would add that we do have all of our, on the code and planning website right now, where all the links are, there is a link for planning board and ZBA projects now. So you don't have to necessarily go to the agenda to find that stuff. You can find it right on the, our website at planning board and ZBA projects. All of that stuff's listed there, and we're actually uploading, like, the comments that we're getting on the stormwater stuff are all going to be uploaded there. So everything will be there for everyone to see and review ahead of time as well.
Right. Thank you.
Are those comments all public? As of, as they're received, do they become public
The, like, comments,
on the site plan?
yeah, those would be entered into the record during the public hearing portion of or public comment period of the hearing. Is that your question?
I think her question is to changes to the plans and everything. Those are public record.
Yeah, yeah. So and if you get comments in between, in between hearings, do those go public immediately or?
Comments from the public. Those can be saved, like Jeremy said,
Until,
for the
okay.
actual hearing.
Correct. Like, I mean, even today, I got some comments that are directed to the select board. I'm going to forward those to the select board, and they'll take them and enter them into the record during their hearing on the specific issue.
Okay.
If someone sends us public comment before the public hearing, the public comment period of the hearing, I won't send those to you. I would give those to you as part of the hearing process, because technically it's like they're supposed to do it during the public comment period, right? So I'd enter into the record then, and if it's an email, I would read it into the record. You guys would have copies of it at that point.
Okay.
I don't think it's fair to have it ahead of time, because that's really not the public comment period yet. Make sense?
Does to me. Yep.
Okay. Sounds good. I think that's all. I would say, we had talked short-term rentals, and I know I should have brought this up during non-agenda items, but we had asked to try to meet with the select board. And I know we've got an election coming up in June, but do you want me to get that in motion again with the
Well, we
select
have our
board?
liaison here.
Um,
Schedule something if you'd like.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'll send an email around just to have a workshop on short-term rentals. Okay, sounds good.
I'll finish my memo.
And just to be clear that our whole point on that is that we don't want to start off down a road and then have the select board be like, why did you do all this? We're not really down this road with you. So we'd like to just sort of try to, well, we have, we have some work to do. It's quite a big job. And so rather than go down that road too far, it'd be best to just get the temperature of the board. So thanks.
Perfect.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.